All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel where we learn about a lot of exciting things, mostly theories of everything, ancient or modern, all encompassing theories that, uh, you know, uh, give guidance on every aspect of your life and that would improve your life if you had an understanding, but you don't because most of these things are so obscure that you've never heard of them before. And today is video number 278 on the reciprocal system of theory. And the reciprocal system of theory was originated by Dewey B. Larson. And Mr. Larson was an engineer in the 20th century and born in 1898. And about 1930, he had a few epiphanies. Um, and then, at night, kept his day job. At night, he moonlighted on trying to work these things out with a slide rule mostly. And took him all the way up until the late 1950s, where he put out his two fundamental postulates. Um, and then from there, he used those postulates as um, his guides to derive a theoretical universe of how he felt that it was a process of if this then that, if this then that. I've actually done about 15 videos on that, called the deductive development of the reciprocal system. That was um, probably about 7 months ago, maybe 8 months ago. And so you can go back in the archives and look for that. But then he finally started writing books on mostly scientific topics, but also some liberal arts subjects. And these are all great books. We've gone over a couple of them, and it's a difficult study, no doubt. Some pretty uh, mind-bending concepts, and also a lot of unlearning that is needed. You can't use the stuff that you learned in school to debunk it, or else you'll just debunk it from the very start. The basic idea of Larson's theory is that we don't live in a universe of matter, and we also don't live in a universe of energy. We live in a universe made entirely of motion. And for Larson, motion was the relationship between space and time. That sets up a generalized reciprocal relationship between space and time. Basically, motion is a fraction that has space or time as the numerator and time or space as the denominator. For example, speed is the most basic motion that we can come up with. The bicycle is moving 20 miles per hour. 20 miles of space in 1 hour of time. Space over time equals speed. Now, all other scientific quantities are also forms of motion and relationships between space and time, with the caveats that space and time are coordinate, meaning that they come in 3 dimensions, x, y, z coordinates in space, and I would say ijk coordinates in time. And then space and time also have their scalar aspect, or what Larson calls their clock aspect. The clock is an example of scalar motion, a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no direction. The clock is always getting later and later and later, but in no particular direction. And that also holds true with space. Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart, but in no particular direction, which you can envision using a balloon with dots on it. You blow up the balloon, all of the dots are moving away from each other. And it was also observed by the Hubble telescope that all of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. Basically, so you have coordinate space, coordinate time, clock space, and clock time. And then you also have discrete unit postulate, meaning that both space and time are quantized. There is a minimum unit of time and there is a minimum unit of space. If you don't have a full unit of either of these, then you don't have them. If you don't have a full unit of space, you don't have space. You need, and then if you don't have two full units, then you still have one. You have to go up by chunks. Now, those chunks are very small. In space, they're microscopic. In time, they're practically instantaneous. But they exist, and you need to have a full unit before you have anything. And if you have 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, and remember we just went over the fact that space over time equals speed. If you have 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, you have the speed of light. And so Larson calls the speed of light unit speed. 1/1 equals 1. And for Larson, the speed of light is the midpoint or the neutral point or the null point of the universe. This is the reference point. He also calls it the progression of the natural reference system. So the natural reference system is measured from the speed of light, whereas in legacy science, everything is measured from zero, from motionless. And that brings out the general differences between a reciprocal system and the legacy system, where in the legacy system you have zero, and then on the positive end you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the negative end you have -1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But in the reciprocal system, 1 is at the center, and on the positive side you have 2, 3, 4, 5. But on the negative side, you have 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5. They multiply to 1 instead of adding up to 0. The balance, the two numbers that are balanced on each side. Okay, and so basically, for Larson, there is an entire half of the universe that is moving faster than the speed of light, along with the half of the universe that's moving slower than the speed of light that we're familiar with. The former he called the cosmic sector, and the latter the material sector. And we, as followers of legacy science, do not know anything about the cosmic sector. In fact, Einstein said that the maximum speed of the universe is the speed of light. So he didn't know anything about the cosmic sector. But what's beautiful about the reciprocal system is that whatever we know about the material sector can be extrapolated over into the cosmic sector merely by inverting the rules of space and time. So in the material sector, we have coordinate space, 3 dimensions of space, and clock time. Time is always getting later and later and later. But in the cosmic sector, we have coordinate time, 3 dimensions of time, and clock space. Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart. Now, the relationship between the coordinate and the cosmic, say in the material sector, coordinate space is an up-close view of space, and we see it in 3 dimensions, whereas clock time is a very distant view of time, and we see that as a scalar motion progression. And then in the cosmic sector, 3 dimensions of time, that's an up close view of time. And then the progression of space is a view of way in the distance of space. Just like the Hubble telescope, all of the distant galaxies are moving in this scalar fashion of clock space. Okay, now, as I said, Larson wrote a number of books then from there, and he developed a little bit of a following, very little, but a few very powerful voices. And then after Larson died in 1990, a few of them emerged even further, especially Dr. KVK Nehru, who we'll be hearing from in future episodes. But today we're also looking at the work of Dr. Bruce Perret. And Dr. Perret came up with what, both of them together came up with what you call RS2, Reciprocal System 2, the re-evaluation of the reciprocal system, which took Larson's concepts and Larson's first postulate in particular, and expanded it into other areas, but also tweaked it a little bit to shore up a few of the kinks that were in the system, which Larson admitted were possible. Larson felt that the system, the postulates, the basis or the fundamentals of the system were correct, but whether he applied them through his deduction correctly was another matter and subject to error. And he did make a few errors, I think, and so do Perret and Nehru. And so Perret wrote many articles, and he had 3 websites that he posted on very frequently, and he has a fairly large body of work, even though he doesn't have any books out there. He passed away, unfortunately, in 2020, but left behind a lot of stuff. And we were reading a lot of his, what they call the Daniel papers, when Perret wrote in a more speculative manner. He would write under the name Daniel Phoenix 3, which was Phoenix 3 was the government above top secret project for time travel that resulted in the Philadelphia experiment of the early 1980s, the Montauk Project on Long Island. And Perret claims at least that he was one of the young computer programmers at the Montauk Project. And here in this particular article called Time and Timelines, he is going over a few of the things that happen in this experiment and how to look upon it in reciprocal system terms. And we're all about done with this article, but if you want to go back about 6 episodes, this is the 7th episode going through this article. So if you want to go back to the beginning of this article, go back about 6 episodes. But we will start here. I think I read this paragraph last time, but just to catch up a little. To understand these technologies, one must first be acquainted with the concepts of 3-dimensional coordinate time, creating a universe of its own, and that universe exists concurrently with our own 3-dimensional coordinate space realm. It is not a parallel reality or tucked away in some far corner of the universe. It is right here, right now, just shifted out of phase with our spatial reality, so our physical senses do not detect it. However, our non-physical senses can detect it and operate within it, which gives rise to psychic ability. Now, I would agree with everything that he says there, except he says our non-physical senses can detect it. And I would agree with that. He's referring to things such as intuition, feeling. But from what he said earlier, it seems like our sense of hearing would also detect it, um, and that we hear in time, in three dimensions of time, but we see. And I'm not sure about the other senses, but we see in three dimensions of space. But I believe that I mean, because that's what he says here in this, just the paragraph before. He's talking about the LM technology, the little men, which are the mythological characters that he says have this a lot of this advanced technology, things like elves and dwarves, sprites, um, characters of little men is what he calls it, um, that are generally confined to mythology for us. There was also a great deal of difficulty with LM technology, as man does not have the physical senses to interact with it properly. You would pick up a rock and say, weighs about 2 pounds. One of the LMs would pick up the same rock and say, it's a B flat. Their sensory organs work differently than ours. Our physical senses are more along the lines of the race we have a genetic similarity to, the SMs, or the spacemen, or saurian men, or reptilians. We can utilize SM technology easily, but LM tech would be better relegated to singers and musicians, as it deals more with the cosmic coordinate time aspect of things. SM tech is purely spatial, which is why it was the preferred technology for the Phoenix projects. Now, I'm not sure why Perret doesn't go into more of the hearing aspects, or the musical, not even musical, but just audio aspects of coordinate time, and look into things like overtones, rhythm. These are all, I would say, dimensions of three-dimensional time. Um, so, he goes with the intuition and the feeling aspects as being part of our non-physical senses, but it seems like these are physical. So anyway, getting back to Perret, however, our non-physical senses can detect it and operate within it, which gives rise to psychic ability. And then he lists several different uh, kinds of psychic ability. Precognition is nothing more than seeing something in the distance in the temporal landscape. Telepathy is two people standing next to each other in time, chatting, regardless of how far apart they are in space. Telekinesis is just manipulating the temporal component of an object with your temporal arm and watching how time changes space. Clairvoyance is a pair of temporal binoculars, being able to see a far distance in time. Clairaudience is yelling down the street at someone in the temporal landscape. And clairalience is a barbecue in the temporal neighborhood. Virtually all of the extrasensory abilities are easily understood once you realize that you exist in two different realms, a spatial, material one for the body, and a temporal, cosmic one for the soul. And the funny thing is, they aren't extrasensory, magical, or metaphysical at all, just a natural consequence of biological life, which we can either choose to learn and use, or ignore. In closing, I'll pass on a little secret. Think back to high school math class and a rather annoying little concept known as an imaginary number, a number that acts like a rotation and does not exist anywhere in space as a quantity. From a young student's perspective, imaginary numbers are harder to deal with than fractions. From our perspective, time is a polar realm. Rotation is what occurs naturally. The material and cosmic sectors are better understood as complex conjugates of each other. Uh, so space is real and time is imaginary, but not in the sense of make believe, but in the sense of the imaginary number. Understand the complex number, a combination of real and imaginary, and you'll understand the connection between space and time, yang and yin, body and soul. Since you know that coordinate time isn't imaginary, those funny little imaginary numbers are actually showing an interaction between the physical and metaphysical. And with a foot in both realms, it does open the door to those things that are beyond space and time. Okay, now that's the end of the paper. Just to refresh your memory, if you are traumatized by your math teacher early on in your life and you tuned out all your math classes, imaginary numbers are the I, J, and K, particularly the I in italics. Those numbers are, I is supposed to be representative of the square root of -1. Okay, that means that the square of I is -1. And so that puts I at the 180-degree mark. It puts this I squared at the 180-degree mark on a graph. If you have 0 degrees is, the coordinates of 0 degrees is 0, 1, or yeah, I don't even remember which is first, but it's to the right at 0 degrees, +1. And then I would be 90 degrees. I squared would be 180 degrees. And I to the third power would be 270 degrees. And then I to the fourth power would be back to 0. And that's kind of how you would be thinking of I as an imaginary number, as a rotation. And then J and K would be the same thing, except on the different axes. So on the X and Y axes, you would have different, the same dynamics there, but they would be perpendicular to the I. And then a complex number, an example of a complex number would be A plus BI. So that's a real number A, and then a real number times you add then a real number times an imaginary number, and that is a complex number. So that's what Perret is really saying, that our perception, where we are located in both coordinate space and coordinate time, and that we would be able to reckon those things by using complex numbers, because the real number is what we're seeing in space, and the imaginary component would be what we're seeing in time. So I think that that approach is very potentially beneficial, or it could really help out. But I haven't dug into it a lot more than that. Okay, well, so that is the end of that article on time and timelines. When we return tomorrow, we'll be starting one more of Perret's articles under the Daniel Papers. And this one is called Geoengineering, Chemtrails, HARP, World Orders, Timelines, and Ascension. So if that is a provocative article that interests you, make sure to tune in tomorrow, and we will get that one started. Okay. Have a great day. Thanks for tuning in.